Okay, so I'm going to talk to you today about pedigrees and how we write and create a pedigree chart. So there are a few basic rules to pedigrees that I'm going to go over and also talk about why we actually use these. Pedigrees can be kind of sometimes referred to as a family tree, and while they can be helpful in looking at our heritage or our lineage, they also can be very helpful in tracking different traits or disorders that might occur due to a genetic trait being passed on from generation to generation. Today, we're just going to focus on how we actually draw a pedigree. My second video will talk about how to actually look at a pedigree and assign genotypes to different phenotypes. Okay? Today, we're going to just start with the basics. Whenever we're doing a pedigree, we have a specific shape that we use for a male and a female. And a square is the shape that is always used to designate a male, and a circle is what is always used to designate a female. Okay? Now, on a pedigree, sometimes, as we know, people get married and they have families. So you have different ways of expressing that. If we are on a pedigree and we see a man and a woman, and there is a line connecting them, this means that there is what we call a marriage line. So this doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is actually married, as you probably know, but it does mean that these two people reproduced. Okay, so whether we want to call it a marriage line or a line of reproduction or whatever you want to refer to it as, that line connecting those two means that at some point in time they reproduced. Now, I'm going to do it like this. So once we have a male and a female that have that, we draw what is called a line of descent. And a line of descent goes vertically. Okay. So this is our line of descent. So the line of descent shows that the two people reproduced. And at some point in time, they had offspring or children. This line here that I just drew across is what we refer to as a sibling line. Okay? So a sibling line designates that there are siblings involved, right? So a sibling line is going to now introduce us to the offspring from this man and woman. So let's just add a few on here. It doesn't need to be anything in particular. I'm going to draw two squares and a circle. So in looking at this, if I go back up to reference my shapes, I know that this couple had two sons and a daughter. Okay, so they had three children, two boys and a girl. Now, whenever we draw a pedigree, each generation is drawn on its own line. So you'll kind of notice the man and woman, or the parents, are on this line, while all the children are drawn on this line. Now, I'm going to erase my labels here really quickly because hopefully you've got that now. So we can just look at the pedigree piece, okay? So here we go. Okay, so now we have our husband and wife, or our mom and dad, and their three children. So we know man, woman, brother, and sister. Okay, so each generation on its own line. So the first generation is always referred to as G1, and we usually write that with a G and a Roman numeral, which means anybody in this line is part of generation 1. The next one would be, as you might guess, G2. So this is our second generation, okay? Now, if one of these children were at some point in time to marry, we would draw a marriage line to that person. And they would still remain in generation 2, but notice that this person is no longer directly connected to these parents. So the marriage has occurred here, and now they might have children that would be drawn here. And if they at some point in time had a child, let's say they had a daughter, then this would be what we would call generation 3. Okay, and any other subsequent future children that any of the other ones might have would also go on to generation 3. All right, so those are kind of the basics. So I'm now going to draw you a pedigree of my family. Now I'm going to draw a large number of generations just to give you an example of how this happens. This would be more what I would equate to being a family tree, because I'm going to include both my parents as well as my grandparents. Because at the end of this week, when you guys are going to kind of try to draw your own, I would like you to go up to your grandparents so you can kind of track your traits that way. So first generation for me, I'm going to start way up here at the top, generation 1. And I'm going to start on this side with my father's parents. And that's because normally when we draw pedigrees, we go oldest to youngest, and we go across from left to right. And my dad happens to be a little bit older than my mom. So I'm going to start on the side with his grandparents. Okay, so here we are going to draw my grandfather and my grandmother, my paternal grandfather and grandmother. Okay, so this here, let's go ahead and we're going to label these as we go. This is my grandpa. His name is Edward. He is my grandpa. All right, and this is my grandmother. Her name is Lorraine. And she is my grandma. Now, Ed and Lorraine, when they got married, had 3 children. So we're going to draw that line of descent down, and we're going to draw in their 3 children. Now they had 2 girls and a boy. So we're going to draw a girl, and we're going to draw a girl, and we're going to draw a boy. Okay. Now this, as you might have guessed, I am starting G2, or my second generation. Now this happens to be Helen. She is my aunt. And this happens to be Diane, who also happens to be my aunt. And this happens to be Edward, which happens to be my dad. Okay? Well, I'm going to stop at this generation here, and I'm going to go over and add in my maternal grandparents or my mom's parents. Okay? So they are going to go back up here on generation 1 because they also are on that location. So we're going to draw her dad, and we're going to draw her mom, and a lovely marriage line connecting them. Now her dad was Roland. I grew up, I always knew him as Raleigh because that's what everybody called him. All right, and that is my grandpa. And then over here we have Norma, and she is my grandma. All right, now okay, so now Raleigh and Norma were married, obviously, and they also had 3 children. So we're going to draw that line of descent here, and then we are going to draw a sibling line to attach their children. Now, of their children, they had 1 daughter and 2 sons. My mom happened to be the oldest of those children, so she is going to go on this end. And then we are going to draw in her 2 brothers. And because, again, they are boys, they are going to be a square shape. So this here is my mom. This is also happens to be named Diane. This is my mom. And then her two brothers, we have Steve, who is my uncle, and we have Mark, that is my uncle. Now, like I said, we always are going to draw that marriage line. So we're going to draw a marriage line between my two parents, okay? And then we're going to draw that line of descent on down. And we're going to start to fill in generation 3. Okay, so we're going to draw a nice long sibling line here. As you're going to learn very quickly here, there are a lot of people in my family. So like I said, we start from oldest and we go all the way down to the youngest. So we're going to start at this end with my oldest brother, okay? And since it's a boy, you guessed it, you're going to draw a square, okay? I said you're going to draw this because if we were in class, I would be making you draw this. And now you just get to watch. Isn't that nice? Okay, so this is my oldest brother. His name is Harneth, named after one of my father's friends from India. So that's my brother. We have Harneth, okay? And next up, I have a sister, and her name is Chris. Sister. And then I have another sister. This is Susan. Sister. And next up would be me. I'm going to leave a space here, and that's because I'm eventually going to add in my husband, and I want to have room to add him in. So I'm going to just leave a little bit of a space there and put myself here. So this is Heather, which is, of course, me. And then we have the next one down, which is my younger brother. This is Rick, brother. And then my very youngest sister, and her name is Laura. And this is my sister. Now, Laura happens to be adopted. So if I'm tracking genealogy and I'm tracking genotypes and I'm tracking genetic inheritance, an adopted sibling is not going to have those same things, correct? So we're going to want to make sure someplace on here we have some way of designating a person who is adopted, because genetically their traits are going to be inherited from different parents, correct? Okay, so what we do to show that somebody is adopted is we actually draw a box around them, whether it's a boy or a girl. In this case, we're going to draw a square on them. I'm just going to use a different color so that it kind of stands out a little bit, but normally it would just be in black. So we're going to draw a big square around Laura, and that's going to designate that she is adopted, okay? Now I'll show you a couple other things that we do when I get done drawing all this in, okay? So that is it for generation 3, okay? So now we're going to add in my husband. Now I could show you all of the marriage that goes on between mine, but I'm really just focusing on my parents, my aunts and uncles, my grandparents, and then we're going to go on down. So we're going to add in here my husband, and his name is Michael. And this is my husband. And obviously I could get more detailed. I could draw in Michael's siblings and his parents, etc., but we're just going to bring in here. And so Michael and I, as you might be aware, also have some children. So we're going to add them in. So we have my marriage line, my line of descent, and then my sibling line. So my oldest happens to be a boy. So drawing a square, his name is Caleb. Now I can add in here that he's my son if I wanted to designate that. Hopefully that would visually be able to be told. And remember that birth order goes this way. Okay, so birth order as I go across. All right, so I have Caleb. Okay, and then I'm going to go way down here to the end, and I'm going to add in my youngest. That also happens to be a boy, and that's Rourke. And he's also my son. Now, you may remember that I told you I have 4 kids. So I have 2 boys, but I have 2 more that have to go in the middle. But they're twins. So again, just like my sister who's adopted, there's a different way to designate twins on here, okay? And I'm going to show you my twins, and then off to the side, I'm going to show you another variation of that, okay? So my twins are what we call fraternal twins, okay? They're a boy and a girl, so fraternal. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw one line down from the sibling line for a short bit, and then we're going to branch that off. In other words, showing that this is like that, okay? And on each side of this, we're going to put in the two children. Now, I have a boy and a girl, but remember, birth order goes from this direction that way. So the oldest twin, who's older by a whole minute, gets to go on this side. And that's my son, so that's Lane. So we're going to add in my son here. Okay, so this is Lane. That's my son. And then my daughter, and that is Emery. Okay. Now, you can see that these two are connected, and then they are connected together to that sibling line. They are twins. This is what we would represent, okay, as fraternal twins. This has a very fancy scientific name called dizygotic. In other words, it means two eggs. My twins came from two separate eggs that both developed together, and then they were born as twins. But it came from two separate eggs, two separate sperm, fertilized at the same time, and then obviously developed together. So dizygotic. Di meaning two. I think that's I'm sorry, I misspelled. Just like in class, dizygotic, okay, means two eggs. All right, that's my twins. Now there is another variation of twins, some of you might know some, called identical twins. And identical twins are represented similar to mine, but there is a little bit of a variation. So I'm going to draw that little bit of a variation. Where do I have some room? How about I move work over just a little bit to the side, and we'll put it in right there. Don't worry, I'm not actually erasing him. I'm just going to move him over a little bit. So we'll put him in here. Okay. So if you were trying to represent identical twins, okay, they would look similar to what I did. You would draw one thing and you would have your lines down. And let's say this was two girls. Because if they are identical twins, they must be of the same sex. They have to be two girls or two boys. Why? Because identical twins come from the same egg. That egg, during very early stages in its development, actually splits and forms two embryos. And then both of those develop into separate human beings, okay? So this dizygotic, meaning two eggs, identical twins, I'm going to write identical down here. Come from something we call monozygotic. In other words, one egg. So this is monozygotic. Monozygotic. Now, it looks like they are represented very similar to mine, except that if I am representing this, I am going to draw a line connecting these two circles like that. That line shows that they are identical twins or monozygotic. No line in between, fraternal twins or dizygotic. Okay? All right, so I hope that explains this process to you and how to draw this. I am going to be asking you to draw a simple sketch and take a picture of it for me of your family. Okay? So just like this, I would like you to include your grandparents, your parents, and your siblings. So while I have four, oh, I forgot to write down generation 4 here. My 4 children. Well, I have 4 generations on my board. You only need to have 3. So grandparents, parents, and siblings. Now there's a couple things I didn't cover, and I told you I would do that at the end. Let's say, for example, that you're going to put somebody on here, but they've since passed away or died. All of my grandparents at this point in time have passed away. So to show that somebody is deceased, all we have to do is draw a line through. And that is going to represent that at this point in time, these people are deceased. Okay? Now, there also may be some other exceptions. Maybe your parents, like my parents, have divorced. It doesn't mean that this marriage didn't happen. I'm sorry, this marriage didn't happen, and that these children didn't happen. But we want to maybe represent that there has been a divorce. So on that marriage line, I am going to draw 2 hash marks. And that shows that a break has happened or a divorce. Okay? Now, is it possible that perhaps then my mom maybe remarried somebody? Absolutely. I would still represent my father here, and I could draw another marriage line to another individual here. So what can I tell you? Writing in pencil when you're doing pedigrees is probably really important as you're starting to sketch them out, because sometimes we have to add these things in. I knew what this was going to look like before I put it on the board, so I was all set to do it beforehand. And yes, my initial sketch in pencil, okay? So I would highly recommend doing that as well. Now, you might end up having, say, something like a half sibling or a step sibling, all right? That's entirely possible too. Let's say, I don't really want to draw on this one. If I had a step sibling, okay? All I would do is I would draw a line, okay? A sibling line would not be connected to my parents, correct? But we would draw over the line and represent it as a step or a half, okay? And if you're not sure how that's going to look, since I'm not in class and able to show you every possible exception, you can absolutely go to Google and look on Google and see if you can find something. And if you're not sure, send me an email and ask me, and I will send you a picture of what it should look like on a drawing, okay? That way we'll kind of cover the bases without me having to try to do every single possibility that I won't be able to remember with a situation that might be unique for yourself, okay? All right, so that's it for drawing a pedigree chart or a family tree, and I will see you next time. I'm going to stop.